We're going to pretend something for just a little bit, okay? I want you to, if you can, I would like for you to put on and think through as if you were a church planter, okay? I want you to, we've already prayed about where, we've already determined what neighborhood, what city, we've already determined what type of a worship style we're going to have. We've determined everything already about what we'd like for the church to be. We've already prayed about it. The answers, we've all that is done. And now it's come to the point of setting up the church. Okay? So how would you go about doing that? What would you look for? What type of leadership would you get? All those things. What would you do? Because I want you to understand something. This is exactly what's happening with Timothy. Okay, in Ephesus. It's exactly what was happening with Titus on Crete. Okay? So where would you start? What's the first thing you would want to do? I know I'm throwing this out. You've never been a church planter. Sometimes you may not think about this, but what's one of the first things you'd want to do?
Pray hard.
Okay? Okay. Now let's assume we've done that. We even got our building. I mean, we are ready to, man, we're ready to run. What are we going to do?
Have we had a pastor yet?
Nope. Don't have anything. You have absolutely nothing.
If there's workers.
Okay? Got to have some workers. So how are we going to get workers? Well, everybody's silent. Everybody's silent. Okay. This is why Jennifer and I were only church planters for a short period of time. Okay. Actually, it's changed a lot. I would do things a lot differently, and one of those things I would do a lot differently is number one, I'd partner up with. Okay. I would look for people who are being led by God to want to be part of a new church. And how do you do that? Well, honestly, the best way to do it is you got to just go and find out. Okay? We, as a Southern Baptist Convention in Indianapolis, guys, we're almost saturated with Southern Baptist churches, but we're very ineffective Southern Baptist churches. We could be a lot more effective. And I'm not blaming leadership. I'm saying that we could be more effective. Okay? And I think that, so what would you look for? Okay, I want to look for somebody. I heard somebody say pastor. Okay, what do you look for? Old pastor, young pastor, what do you look for? A seminary degree, not seminary degree. What do you look for?
Somebody who knows the Bible.
Okay, somebody who knows the Bible.
Someone knows the Bible.
Okay.
I think I'd prefer a seminary degree.
Okay, that's fine.
Somebody that feels like God called him to be in that position.
Okay, right. We're not talking about somebody who is, right. This is a big position. This is a big responsibility. Okay. So as we go through this, see, guys, it's not as easy as we think sometimes. Hey, we're going to go start a church. Why don't we start more churches? It's not nearly as easy as we think. Okay. Something else that I would want us to be able to do is one of the things we have to set up is, guys, what everybody has to know when they walk through the door of the church. Whatever building we choose, and we're using elementary school on Sundays, we're fortunate enough to have our own building. One of the things they need to know is what we believe. Okay, it's vitally important what we believe, and not because the State Convention of Baptists tell us to believe that, because the Bible tells us to believe it. And we would have to make sure that is written out. Have to make sure people can see it, so that it's in front of them, so they can have it. Because it's important. Something else we have to be able to do is we have to make sure when people come that they can be part of something. Okay, they can serve somewhere. That the pastor can't be the person who's gonna say, I'm going to do everything because I just feel led to be the church planter. Well, that's fine, except that's not how it really works. Okay. Because if you want to be successful, you have to have, again, administrative things in place. Know what we believe, why we believe it, how we deal with certain, there are some things that you can put in place and some things you have to develop, right? Like how do we set up Sunday school? Well, you can do that once you get more people for Sunday school. Are we even going to have Sunday school? We're going to have small groups. All of this information has to be thought through before you really should kick off into a church. Now, it's easy for us in our church, guys, piece of cake. Okay, I just know something, it's a piece of cake because most of it's already done. Okay? And so as we think about this, I want us to think about in the church, why we have structure set up the way that we do, okay? And so, if you would, let's see what Paul tells Timothy about some of this structure, okay? In fact, it's in 1 Timothy chapter 5, starting in verse 17. I want us to see this because structure, because I want you to know if we don't have structure in the church, you'll have chaos in the church, okay? So we can't have that. So here, now remember, he's been going through here, talking about various things in the church, overseers. He's been talking about honoring widows. We talked about that last week. And now he's going to talk about elders. Okay? And listen to what he says, starting in verse 17. He says, the elders who lead well are to be considered worthy of double honor, especially those who work hard at preaching and teaching. For the scriptures say, you shall not muzzle the ox while it is threshing, and the laborer is worthy of his wages. Do not accept an accusation against an elder except on the basis of 2 or 3 witnesses. Those who continue in sin rebuke in the presence of all, so that the rest also will be fearful of sinning. I solemnly exhort you in the presence of God, of Christ, and of Christ Jesus, and of his chosen angels, to maintain these principles without bias, doing nothing in a spirit of partiality. Do not lay hands on anyone too quickly, and thereby share responsibility for the sins of others, keeping yourself free from sin. Do not go on drinking only water. Do not go on drinking only water, but use a little wine for the sake of your stomach and your frequent ailments. The sins of some people are quite evident, going before them into judgment. For others, their sins follow after. Likewise, also deeds that are good are quite evident, and those who are otherwise cannot be concealed. Okay, so he covers now talking about elders. If you notice, he very much begins, and he gives Timothy a very clear instruction when it comes to elders. Now we have to understand a couple of things. Okay, Timothy here, when the structure of the church here, that the key to it is that if you have elders and deacons, because remember, biblically they are not the same. Okay, they're not the same. So if you do have deacons, if you do have elders, ideally what should they be doing? Working together. Okay? Working together for the same cause, the same purpose, right? And again, if a church has both of those things, or has one or the others, working together in harmony. One of the greatest tragedies is when one of those groups tries to be a spiritual dictator of the church. Okay? You ever meet a spiritual dictator? Have you ever met somebody that's over-spiritualizes everything? Okay? I want you to know something. Not everything has a spiritual meaning behind it. Okay? Sometimes we just make a really dumb choice and there's consequences for it. Alright? But we need to remember this. Go to 1 Peter. Okay? I want you to see something here. Go to 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 3. Okay? I want you to see this. 1 Peter 5:3. Listen to what Peter talks about this concept in the church. Okay? He says, nor yet as domineering over those assigned to your care, but by proving to be examples to the flock. So if we have deacons, elders, pastor, how should we treat others in an official capacity in those positions? What did Peter just say? What did he say? He says, not yet domineering. What does it mean to domineer someone? Control, dominate, bossy. Okay, over that.
You need to be a leader and not a driver.
Sure, okay, sure. A leader, not a driver.
You drive people to do things.
Right. Okay, so here he's reminding them of these things, and we have to remember that there's some people want to get in positions in the church simply for the sake of being in that position. And guys, listen to me very carefully. We can buy into that person really easy if we're not careful. And by the way, they'll give themselves away by their behavior. Okay, they will give themselves away. All right. So, but notice here, I want you to go to 3 John, please. We'll talk about this topic just another thing here. 3 John chapter 9 and 10, verses 9 and 10. Listen to what he says. Okay. I write something to the church, but Diotrephes, who loves to be first among them, does not accept what we say. In other words, there was a guy in the church who said, I'm the man. I'm in charge. I don't care what you disciples say. I don't care what the truth is. I'm in charge. Okay? That's literally what he says here. Okay? He says, do not accept what we say. For this reason, if I come, I will call attention to this, to his deeds, which he does unjustly, accusing us with malicious words, and not satisfied with this. He himself does not receive the brothers either. And he forbids those who want to do so and puts them out of the church. Okay, what did Paul tell Timothy about witnesses? What did he say back in 1 Timothy 5? What did he say?
Be like 2 or 3.
Yep, it can't be the word of one person. Guys, we do that all the time. If so-and-so said that they've been in the church forever, and you know they love this church more than anybody because they've been here for 85 years. Okay? And we forget it doesn't matter title, position. It matters about what the Bible says, how we do that. Okay? But here he says is don't do it. But more importantly, what I want us to see here is he's reminding Timothy of something. He's reminding Timothy, saying, Timothy, there's obviously something going on in this church in Ephesus. Did you pick up on that by chance? Okay, did anybody pick up on that?
Yes.
Okay, there's obviously something going on here because he's warning him. He is sharing with them, but at the same time, what he is saying to them is very interesting here. He says, make sure you pay honor to those that are serving God. Okay, that's what he says there, starting there in verse 17. He says here that there wasn't just one pastor, there were multiple elders serving in the church, multiple that were serving, making sure that they ministered to the people. And here's the thing, that many years ago, I had someone say that the church has every right to tell a pastor whether or not they can work outside of the church. I've heard that said. Do you agree with that? I'm not asking to pick sides. Do you agree with that or not? If you agree with that, here's the key. Then you have to pay him so that he doesn't have to work outside the church. Okay? That's what I told this person. This person brought it up, right? So he's literally talking about pay right here. Literally, that's what he's doing. Okay? He's not saying if Donnie's better than somebody else, we gave him twice as much. He is saying that it's honor to do so. It's an honor to make sure that we take care of those who are ministering amongst others, amongst us. That's literally what he's saying here, and he's reminding us of this. Remember, the elders in Ephesus, the problems that were there. Paul, how many of you guys have ever went to work and you had to follow up the employee of the year at the position you were going to start filling? Okay? And once you know, it's really hard to follow up somebody everybody loved and adored. Am I right? It is. It's hard to, not for you, not for that person who left, but the person filling in, coming in for that person. And here he is reminding, and he's saying, this is kind of what's happening in that church at Ephesus. Oh, you're not so-and-so, Timothy. You're not so-and-so, Timothy. Okay? He's reminding them, don't do that. And I want us to see this because he was truly a young man. Let's face it. Do we sometimes look at younger people, they're not as smart as older people? Yeah, we do. And sometimes because we do that, we don't think they're as smart as we are. We might make their life miserable because of it. Okay? Because I've been around longer than you, no matter what the job might be. Okay? There's a difference between teaching the tricks, okay, how to make a machine work better that didn't before, versus simply saying, hey, I'm older than you, I'm smarter than you are. Okay? Yeah.
There was a gentleman in the church that told his son, I've been your age, you've not been mine.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And so Timothy here is facing this. I mean, Timothy is facing this church, and he's saying, hey, Timothy, I want you to know something. If Paul was sending somebody to a church, that means the church needed to be what? Corrected, straightened out. Okay? Now, mind you, that doesn't mean Timothy's going to walk in and go, I got these papers from Paul. And we have to follow these things, right? No. That's not what he would have said, but he did say to him, but there are going to be some people in there that are going to cause you problems. Okay? This is what he did say to him. There are going to be some of those people that are there. But I want to take a moment. And it's interesting here because notice what he says here. He says, don't stop those who are preaching. Why is it? What is it? Where can a tendency be to stop somebody from preaching? Where can a tendency be to stop them?
is not sound.
Okay, what else? There's another even more, another even one problem that takes place more even than that. But you're 100% correct. What else do you think? I don't like what he said.
No.
And I'm going to stop that from happening. I know that's never happened. You probably never witnessed that. Probably none of us ever have, right? But that's what happens. And we'll usually use different phrases to try to justify that. Okay, and it can be, by the way, biblically sound, doctrinally sound, even doing those things. Okay, so here's Timothy. He's saying to Timothy, he says, hey, you know what? Make sure you know what you believe. Make sure that you know what's there. He said he's having a hard time about this. Now let's talk about something for just a moment here. If you would, go to verse 23 for just a moment. We're going to move ahead here for just a second. Okay. He says to him, do not go on drinking only water, but use a little wine for the sake of your stomach and your frequent ailments. Okay. Why would he all of a sudden just point that out? Why all of a sudden does he say to Timothy, start drinking?
Some people make you sick at your stomach.
Okay, there's part of it. No, he's right. There's part of it. Potentially part of it. Potentially part of it. Okay? Obviously, it's very clear. He says that he's got something going on, right? Now, is he speaking to Christians in general? No. He is speaking to who? Timothy. All right? So, he is saying, he's not even speaking to the church at Ephesus. He is speaking directly to Timothy. Okay? And so here he is saying this, but we have to remember here, this is not Paul saying, drink all you want. Okay? Nor is this Paul saying, well, you know what, wine's better for you because the water's bad. You guys ever heard that before? Yeah. Then why do you tell him don't drink as much water as what you were drinking? Because he was drinking water, right? He wasn't getting sick from it. Okay? Even though we do know the water was bad. But the reality is here is that he's not saying, you know what, just start drinking socially because medically it's good. They've proven, have you guys ever heard this before? They've proven that wine's good for you. You guys ever heard that? Do you guys want to know what the real truth is? The grapes in the wine are what's good for you. Okay? That's the truth, that the grapes, it's not the alcohol or the water, it's the grapes and the extracts from the grapes that are good for you.
Doesn't all have to be fermented.
No, exactly. It does not have to be fermented. That's right. Okay? So here he is talking about this. And Brother Donnie, as various commentators do say, man, you might want to take a little drink there the way those people at Ephesus are treating you. They've said that. Literally, I've read commentators about it. Now, I'm not saying they're right. I'm just saying that that's out there. Okay? So again, reminding the elders, hey, make sure they're taking care of church. Make sure that that they are given honors. Make sure that that is there, and that's something that we need to remember, not just for a pastor position, but for serving in various churches and various places in the church. That we have to make sure that if necessary, if we can do so, to try to take care of. That's what he's reminding them to do. Now, there's different types of elders in the church. Okay, you have ruling elders and you have teaching elders. Can anybody guess the difference between the two? Ruling elders and teaching elders. Anybody guess the difference?
Some teach, some rule, some teach.
Exactly. One teaches, one rules. Now, it's interesting here, though. Those elders that are there, they didn't just show up to the church one day and go, hey, we're going to be elder of your church. Okay? Because that's not how it works, does it? Okay? I had someone ask me before, how is so-and-so used to be? Or say, because the church voted him in. A person just doesn't show up at a church and become a pastor, become a music person. Those things the church approves, right? That's what happens. And this is also what he is saying here, that they are approved by the congregation, and since the congregation approves that, they are agreeing with the call of God in their life to serve God that way. Okay? Everybody say, well, I'm called by God to do this. Well, we can't, that's great. But I firmly believe we're called by God, and the church affirms that call by putting us into that position that is there. And you can disagree with me if you like, but no one's going to walk in the church tomorrow, we're going to make them the pastor just because they feel called by God. Right? And no one's going to start leading music in the church tomorrow just because they say they feel led by God. We all know what's going to happen, right? It's going to be a process, voting, talking about. So that's why I feel that way and believe that way. But again, why do we ordain somebody? Why do we really do it?
To usually put the approval of the church, that we feel he has the calling that God has done, and we're saying we think he's a fit subject to do that.
Okay, you're on there. Keep going. Okay, let's do something here. Let's look at that. Okay, let's go to the book of Acts for just a moment. Acts chapter 14. All right. I want you to see, and we'll keep building on that. Okay, Donnie. We're going to look at this chapter 14, verse 23. Okay. All right. Here's what it says, and we're going to look at actually chapter 20 as well, verse 17 and 28. But he says this: when they had appointed elders for them in every church, remember the history of the church is the book of Acts, they entrusted them to the Lord in whom they had believed. Okay? So they were ordained in the Lord, whom they had believed. And then it goes on to chapter 20. It goes on chapter 20, verse 17, and it tells us this about this same topic. It says, from Miletus he sent word to Ephesus, and called to himself the elders of the church. And it says, so he said, so he called himself who? The elders of the church. Is everybody an elder? No. Is everybody a deacon? No. Okay. All right, now, let's go to verse 28 of this same chapter of Acts chapter 20. Okay? He says this. It says, be on guard for yourselves and for all the flock among which the Holy Spirit has made you overseers. Remember, plural, so that means there's more than one here. Okay? To shepherd the church of God, which he purchased with his own blood. Okay. Now, does anybody see the second thing why people are ordained? Set apart publicly for ministry. Okay, this is what he says right here. Set apart publicly for ministry. And why do we need both teaching? Why do they both need teaching elders and ruling elders? Do you think?
I would say that goes back to when we look at Jesus and the 12 disciples, apostles. Judas was one. He was of it, but he was not. Or he was among them, but he wasn't of it. So it's confirmation, I believe, of what they truly believe, what their actions are, and how they decipher God's word and apply it to their own personal life and how it affects others.
Okay. What else? Anything else? Jim?
Well, if you have some being teachers, they can focus on the teaching and not all the other junk that has to be dealt with, and the ruling ones would deal with that, I would think.
Okay. No, okay. I'm just, okay. I mean, absolutely. In fact, if you read the book of Acts, that's exactly what happens. Okay? That's exactly what happens. He says, you guys deal with the widows not being taken care of. We're going to preach. We're going to pray. We're going to do the things God. That's exactly what happened as well. Okay? So anybody else? There's no wrong. I just want us to think about this. Because see, I asked you about setting up a church. Something else that you would do is you set up the governance of the church, right? Definitely the governance of the church. But again, you don't just pick somebody who walks off the street, comes in and says, this is what I want to be. Right? Okay? So we'll continue to look at this. What you know what they don't teach you, or at least I never got it in seminary, and that is administration. Okay? How many of you are good with numbers? How many of you are good with organizing people? That's also administration. Okay? How many of you are good at getting things done? Right? These are things that they can't teach you in seminary out of a book. Well, we can read about it, right? So one of the things that, and we're on to this, one of the things you have with ruling elders versus the teaching elders, those ruler elders, I don't know if you guys understand the idea of elders, but in a nutshell, elders primarily make the decisions for the church. Okay? The church actually biblically functions way better that way if we actually read it. Okay? But you have to have who in those positions? Chosen men by God who have the gift to be there in those positions. Okay? They don't say things like such as this is going to be the budget for the church. That's something they make and present to the church. Okay? They make primarily the bulk of the decisions that need to happen. Unless they're huge decisions, then they bring them back before the church. Because remember this, guys, when we place people into leadership roles in the church, we should not have to look over their shoulders every time something needs to get done. Because the moment we pass a budget and the moment we put somebody in a position, we trust that they're going to do the things they've been asked to do and challenged by the church to do. Okay? And so an elder is going to be, in this case, a ruling elder. These are the type of the things they're going to have to do. They're not going to be dictators. Right? They're not going to be dictators. Nobody wants to work for a dictator, right? Nobody wants to. And this is what it needs to happen. This is why they have some different things here. This is why it's important. I mean, let's face it. Our churches, or should churches be, to some extent, run like a business? Just simple yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. Why? Organization. Now, that doesn't mean that we run like Walmart, right? That doesn't mean we run like all these businesses. But do you guys know we're held accountable by the state of Indiana? We're held accountable by the federal government. Okay? There's things that if we don't do, they can come back and say, why didn't you do this? Oh, and since you didn't do this, here's your fine. Okay? So if we put people in positions who are not led, who are actually not just led to do that, but have the gift to do that, okay, that we can find ourselves in trouble because of that. So then the next thing here, so let's go to the teaching part, okay? I mean, let's face it, not that some people have more of an ability to be a ruling elder than a teaching elder, am I right? Because they're different positions, so that means God's going to give people different abilities to do that. So let's go for a moment here, and I want us to go to, we're going to look at two different passages of scriptures, okay? The first one I want us to do here is I want us to go to 1 Corinthians chapter 12, okay? And I apologize, we don't have spiritual gifts inventories yet, but we're supposed to be getting those. So 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 28. Okay, I want you to hear what this verse has to say. Okay, he says this. He says very simply, and God has appointed in the church first apostles, second prophets, third teachers, then miracles, then gifts, and help and healings, help, administrations, and various kinds of tongues. Now I'm not going to talk about that, sit there and talk about what all those spiritual gifts are tonight, okay? But what I want us to see here in this list is that God puts people in positions because certain things have to get done where? In the church. Okay? And some people, as I look out here, some of you are going to be better at administration than other people. Doesn't mean you have to be an elder, but the two things we're talking about in Timothy is very much talking about that position. But here, he says that there's going to be, if you will, an order. That there's going to be different people for different things. Okay? So here is what he is trying to get them to see in the church at Corinth. A church at Corinth that was a little messed up too. Okay? So that's what he's getting at here. So we have to remember, if you only have ruling elders and no teaching elders, can anybody see the potential of a disaster? Okay? So this is what Timothy is getting at here. Timothy is also reminding, Paul is also reminding this to Timothy. He's reminding them of that. Ephesians chapter 4, go there for just a moment. Paul wrote this letter to the church at Ephesus, which we're dealing with here in 1 Timothy. And it's chapter 4, verse 11. Okay? And it's the same thing. It says that he gave some as apostles, some as prophets, some as evangelists, some as pastors and teachers. Okay? And I want you guys to notice there that not everybody is all of those things. Right? Okay? And was Billy Graham a pastor? Everybody go, no. Billy Graham was a what? Evangelist. Okay? Billy Graham was not. I can almost guarantee you that Billy Graham had people in his organization, just as his father, his son does, people who were administrative people, who God gave the ability to run things and do things. Okay? Yeah, his name may have been on the name plaque, if you will, but nonetheless, he was the evangelist. Now, was he capable of doing some of those things? I'm sure he was. I'm sure there's some things But also, he knew where his limit, I can guarantee you that man, if he was standing here tonight, knew what his limitations were by God, knew what his gifts were from God. Okay? And he is probably, if not the greatest, one of the greatest evangelists ever on the face of this earth. Ever. Okay? Because he understood what God wanted him to do, instead of trying to do that, plus 14 other things that he didn't call God to do, but I just want to have my fingers in it. Right? He didn't do that. So let us remember that. And don't forget that. And then that's why Paul said this in Luke chapter 10. He said the laborer is deserving of his wages. Okay? That's what he's getting at. How many of you guys go to work? And why do you go to work? Usually it's to get what? Paid. And if you don't get paid enough, you usually go do what? Find another job. Okay? And then you hope that, see, my point is we understand that concept outside of the church. Okay? Now, I'm not talking about myself here. I'm talking about what the scriptures are saying about this. He's reminding them, making sure that if we're going to call people, making sure that we're going to say this is the only thing you're allowed to do, we need to take care of them. Okay? And again, obviously, we can work things out and so forth and so on, but the reality is, if that's what he is saying to these people, because there was no such a thing as a part-time elder in the churches when this was written. That's all they did. Okay, that was it. They didn't do something else. That's all they did. Okay, so he's encouraging Timothy, make sure that you do so. Make sure that they are taken care of, because this is what it's all about. 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 17, that's what he's talking about. He is saying to him, make sure they're worthy of double honor, making sure that they are taken care of. Okay? Because guys, I promise you, there's many, many potential problems. If a pastor has to be bivocational, do you guys understand how many problems that can cause in the church? It can cause big problems. Okay? Because if a church is hiring a part-time pastor, they have to have in place a plan. It says, okay, eventually we don't want that person to be a part-time pastor. And that pastor's got a job that pays all of his bills, and the church says, we want you to be full-time, but it's only going to pay half of your bills. Doesn't work. Right? Doesn't work like that. But sometimes that's what we expect. Okay? So you have to work things through, think things through before we do that. And that's something else when it comes down to what would you want to do when it comes to starting a church. Okay? That's important to remember, because that's who God intends for us to make sure that we do so. And this is what he's reminding them. That's what is all about. Now, and at the same time, 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 3, it literally says, not overindulging in wine, not a bully, but gentle, not contentious, free from the love of money. That last part, free from the love of money. An elder or minister in the church that is also talking about here is making sure that they're just not out to try to get rich. Okay? Because that's just as bad as not making sure we take care of something or someone when we choose to do so. Because that's truly what it's all about here. And so now he breaks down, he gets over here in verses 19, 20, and 21 of chapter 5, and he begins to look at discipline. How many of us like discipline? No one. Nobody. Okay. What did you say? I didn't hear you.
I like to give it.
You like to give it? Okay. All right. Okay. So now he gets into this idea. So verses 19, 20, and 21. He's talking about here, guys, we can never take the word of one person as truth. He didn't say take one person's word as a lie either. But we need to remember this. We have to understand this because he says an elder is worthy of honor. Right? And that means a deacon should be worthy of honor. A pastor should be worthy of honor. Not taking the word of somebody who got mad at something they did or they assumed they did and tried to cause problems. Okay? And so this is what he's reminding us, is this is not how it's supposed to. He says in verse 19, he says, don't accept anything from one person's truth. Don't accept it. Okay? Because that is a problem. In fact, he says this. He says the minimum 2 or 3. It can't just be a person because, again, they're upset about what may or may not have happened. Okay? That, again, he's not saying that if you have a problem that you shouldn't go to that person. Okay, that's not what he's saying here at all. But we should never have it where we're set up at a church and one person stands up and says, so-and-so needs to be gone because I saw this. Okay, that's what he's talking about here. It has to be more done because we've been talking about what? Order in the church. Okay, order in the church. That's what he's getting at here. That's what he's talking about here. And he's warning them. He's warning them. How many of you guys know that O.J. Simpson was found guilty? Oh, no, he wasn't, was he? He was found what? Innocent. But you know, I heard a lot of people say, I know he was guilty. Did you guys hear that? When he was convicted? My question for that person is, did you see the evidence? Nope, we just heard what? What was on TV? That's all we heard. But boy, people made up their mind that he did this because of the evidence they never saw. Okay? And the bias that they saw in the media. So automatically they made a decision based on 0 evidence. Not one of us sitting here was a part of that jury, were we? Not one of us. So thusly, not one of us can make a clear decision based upon what was that there or not there because we never saw it. Okay? And it's the same way here. He's saying, you know what? You can't take the accusations of one person. That's a bad problem. That's a bad thing because it is there. Now, what is the purpose? What is the purpose of discipline? Not just in church. I'm just talking about in general. What's the purpose of discipline?
Teach.
To teach. Okay, what else?
Correct or wrong.
Correct or wrong.
Recognize sin.
What's that, Terry?
Recognize sin.
Okay. What else? Anything else? Okay. Another thing we do as the disciplines, we hope they won't do that anymore. Right? We hope that behavior won't be repeated. But it's interesting here because per a church, we can find ourselves in trouble if we're not careful. I want you guys to know something. In the church now that we have it set up, a person cannot just simply make an accusation against the pastor, against a deacon, against elder, and say, we're going to fire them because I think we should. Okay? Do you know what the Bible says how we're supposed to do it? We're supposed to go to them, and then go to them. Okay? And that's now how we're set up. Because biblically, that's how we're supposed to do it. Okay? And so here, this is what it's about. So he's saying the same thing. He says, don't just make an accusation against an elder and say they need to go. Prove it. Prove it. Make sure you did due diligence. Make sure that you followed the steps that were taking place. Because the ultimate goal of church discipline, does anybody know what that is? Is to restore.
Right.
It's not to say get out and never come back. Okay? Now there's a good possibility a person who has been church disciplined may leave and never come back. But that's not on the church. That's not the purpose of it. And that's what he's getting at right here as well. That's what it's truly all about. And understanding this. So we have to remember this, that the purpose of it is to restore. In fact, let's go to Galatians chapter 6. I want to see something. I want you to see something here. Okay? Paul wrote to the churches of Galatia. Okay, not to one church, but to several churches. And he writes here in Galatians chapter 6, verses 1, 2, and 3. Okay? He says this. Brothers and sisters, even if a person is caught in any wrongdoing, you who are spiritual are to restore each such a person in a spirit of gentleness, each one looking to yourself so that you are not tempted as well. So in other words, those who are making such an accusation, those who are doing such, make sure you are right with God. Okay? Then he goes on. And he says, bear one another's burdens and thereby fulfill the law of Christ. For if anyone thinks that he is something when he is nothing, he deceives himself. Okay, now I want you to see something here about that. When you look at that phrase up there, right there at the very beginning here, he says, even if your person is caught in a wrongdoing, you are spiritual, are to restore such a person. I believe that in the King James it says, what's it say right there? Instead of restoring, you'll say something else. Okay? All right, here's what it literally means. Okay? Have you ever broke a bone?
Yes.
Okay? All right? How many of you guys have ever had to have surgery because a bone got broken? Okay, when a doctor sees an arm broken, if for some reason the bone is broken severely, they have to do surgery. The reason for the surgery is to set the bone back in its proper what? Place. Okay? How they do that? With screws, whatever, okay? But the reality is here is that the whole point of fixing it is so that it's put back together whole, and when it heals, it's back to normal. You don't have two arms, two bones, they're back and they're healed together. This is the picture here that Paul was writing to the churches at Galatia. It literally means to set a bone, okay? So putting it back where it needs to be. How long can a bone take to heal? Weeks or months or years, depending upon what it is. So also what we need to remember here is patience. How many of us are patient? Okay? And sometimes it depends on the circumstances. Okay? All right? But generally, we need to be patient. Now, how many of you, and there's nothing wrong with this, how many times have we said, God, I want this answered right now? We don't use those words necessarily. And by the way, what did you say, Andrea?
Expect it.
Yes, we should expect it, though. That's the thing.
Right now.
Right, we should. When we go to God, it should be, God, if you feel like it, if you get around to it. No, it's God, this is what I want. God, this is what I'm hoping you can give me, right? It's not supposed to be, again, if you get around to it. But again, he says to make sure and caution. Make sure that we do it right. Remember, one person cannot make an accusation against a pastor, against an elder, and the whole church go, yep, we're going to believe that person. They didn't say that they're lying, but Paul said, not acceptable. Okay? And so that's something. The second thing he says to make sure we pay attention to is make sure that if, and I've had this happen to me, that if somebody has a problem with the pastor or elder, don't you dare go to them and say, I can't tell you who told me this. It's not biblical. Not even close. Because you see, one of the things he's also saying here is if I have something against you and you have it against me, you have the right to know what that accusation is, where it came from, so you get it straight from the source. They won't accept secondhand information in court, at least they're not supposed to. Okay? That's also what he's saying here. We can't accept that. Not acceptable, because that is not the way we're supposed to treat someone who's beheld in double honor. Someone who's supposed to be held in those positions. Okay? That we read that at the very beginning. And that's why he says it. Because guys, we cannot look at it as a pastorship or an eldership as a throwaway thing. Oh, we'll just get a new one. Okay? Well, we'll just get a new one. If this one doesn't work out, we'll just get a new one. Because I'm going to tell you what, the church will always have problems if that takes place. Always. All right? Because it's never going to be satisfied with that. Make sure that it's there. So verse 21 of 1 Timothy 5, he says this, reminding us of something that's there. It says, I solemnly exhort you in the presence of God and of Christ Jesus and of his chosen angels to maintain these principles without bias, doing nothing in a spirit of partiality. What's it saying there? What's it saying not to do? Or to do, I should say, as well. What's that?
Pick favorites.
Yep, don't pick favorites. Okay? Don't pick favorites. He's also saying, you know what? Make sure that when you're doing this, to investigate it fully. One of the things that was difficult when we as a church put together a few policies in our church was how do you deal with something that is potentially a problem. And that is one of the things we have in there is to do just that. To go to make sure, hey, I understand this is a lifestyle you're living that's contrary to the scriptures. It can't just simply be, you know what, we heard it. Okay? All right, and he's saying to Timothy, don't do that. And we might have a tendency to do that if we like somebody else versus somebody else because we like them better. Okay? And he's saying, don't do that because that is a huge, huge problem. We need to remember that. And again, we need to simply make sure that we investigate these things. Again, we're not investigators, but guys, if only one person, one of the things I've learned in almost 31 years of pastoring, if one person is constantly griping, there's a good possibility there's absolutely nothing wrong. Okay? I said good possibility. I didn't say an impossibility. Okay? Because I have found over the years that if one person's all they do is gripe about something, they're usually the ones that have the problem. And I've learned that from experience. Okay? And that's also what he's getting at here. Okay? Again, he's not saying we are to ignore. He's not saying to do that. But he is reminding us to make sure that we are hearing the truth. If we're not telling the truth, what are we hearing? A lie. Okay? And he doesn't want that. Doesn't want that to happen. In second John, if you would, for just a moment, turn to 2 John chapter verses 10 and 11. Okay, you can find 10 chapters in 2 John. You look way harder than what's there, right? Okay, 2 John verses 10 and 11. Okay, again, when he's talking about this whole idea here, he says this. If anyone comes to you and does not bring this teaching, do not receive him into your house and do not give him a greeting. For the one who gives him a greeting partakes in his evil deeds. Okay, so what that is saying is what? What's it saying, guys?
It says you're in agreement with him.
Yep. And how do I know you're telling the truth? How do you know if I'm telling the truth, right? Okay, and so that's something he wants to remember. And that's what he's, this whole book that he's writing to Timothy, he's saying, Timothy, man, he's almost starting from scratch, right? There's problems in the church. There's things you got to set up so the church can function like a body. It's functioning like it's supposed to be, okay? And that's something we need to remember. And by the way, one of the things that part of an ordination service, okay, we had one here. Well, how long ago, Carrie? 2 years, 3 years, 2 years, something like that? Something like that. Okay? One of the reasons that you also have an ordination service for someone is because prior to that service, that person is usually sat down and they're visited with about doctrine and other things. Okay? Because the last thing you want to do is put a person in a position in the church who aren't biblically qualified. Okay? I didn't say perfect. Said biblically qualified. Okay? And yes, the church also has an opportunity. We're given opportunities to speak and to ask questions. Okay? So it wasn't just a select group, it was anybody who chose it. Because remember, the reason for the select group should be, we're not quite sure this guy's right there biblically. Some of the answers this person gave, I don't see it in the Bible. And that committee's responsibility, if you're on a committee, I want you to understand this, so please hear me. Part of your responsibility is to determine if you believe that what you're doing is something that would be beneficial and biblical for the church to do. And if you say that it's not, you don't just say, well, if somebody brought it to us, we're going to bring it to the church. That's why we don't just put people on teams simply to fill teams. Okay? Yes, I want more people serving in our church, but I'm not just going to simply say, you and you and you and you and you do this. Okay? We have to make sure that we understand that part of a team's responsibility is to make sure what they are doing fits the criteria by which they are supposed to live up to. A deacon screening committee, for instance, their job is pretty simple. Is this person biblically qualified to serve in this position? And if they are not, nothing personal, Terry, but we don't feel you're at this time, that's where you need to be. Okay? That's part of that safeguard. Because guys, you want you to know that sometimes we bring things before the church, and not everybody pays attention to what we're bringing before the church. I'll just be honest with you, they don't. It's just as bad to vote everything through, and it's just as bad to vote no to everything. Okay? They can both be just as destructive. All right? So we have to make sure that we're doing this. Make sure they're set apart. Make sure that these elders, Timothy, are those who are going to serve greatly in those positions. Again, he says to them, here's their qualifications. Here's what it's about. Now, ultimately, whose decision is it? The church's. That's why, again, when you have committees, when you have teams, when you have these things take place, we have to make sure they're qualified. We have to make sure. Because literally what he's saying here, and I think Charlie, maybe you said this, that he's literally saying, listen, you're going to be a partaker of this if you bring it before the church. If you think that he is, or that he isn't, and you know deep down that he doesn't meet, and you bring it before the church, you're just as guilty as one who lied to you. That's why we need to be very, very careful when we put teams together to make decisions to present to the church. Okay? And I'm not talking about we should have a green carpet or bronze carpet issue. I'm talking about people with deep doctrinal issue potential problems. Okay? This is what he's getting at right here. So that is something we need to remember. And that's something also, guys, I want to close with this. We already know this, but sometimes I think we forget this. And he's literally also saying and reminding Timothy about these people, they're not perfect. Okay? Pastors aren't perfect, elders aren't perfect, Sunday school teachers aren't perfect, deacons aren't perfect. Right? Am I right? Everybody says yeah. We all know that. Okay? This is not talking about being perfect. This is talking about making sure that you're biblically sound, making sure you know what God has called you to do, and then to do so. Okay? If you make a mistake, because you're not perfect, hey, okay, let's work through that. We'll say, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that, or I did this, and that was a really dumb choice. Okay? Again, guys, that's why it's so important that when we make decisions as teams and as a church, that when that decision is brought before the church, that it has already been vetted, if you will, to make sure that we know that it's not going to come before the church and potentially hurt the church badly. Okay? And again, it can make people mad. We knew somebody who said, I'm not a tither. And people kept saying, well, bring me before the church anyway. Well, one of the requirements for that position was you had to be a tither. Okay? So it's important. It's not about if I like you or you like me. It's about making sure we follow what? What the Bible says. That's what's important. All right? Okay, we're going to close there. Please remember, Bible study Wednesday night. We're going to continue looking at some of the attributes of God. Don't forget Friday and Saturday. I don't remember the times, Chrissy. What, 9 to 4 and then 9 to 3? Is that right? On Saturday. And Friday and Saturday. So if you have stuff you want to bring in, I'll have this door open for you tomorrow morning. If you bring stuff in, you can put them in here. As long as they're not, in the way for Bible study, you can put them wherever you like. Okay? All right, let's pray. Father God, I thank you for loving us. I thank you for, Lord, for giving us your word so we can know what and how we need to do things in your church. Lord, teach us every day to just to follow you the best we can, best we know how. And Lord, help us to make right decisions based upon who you are in your word. And Lord, we do thank you ahead of time for what you're going to do when we do that. I just pray for everyone here tonight, Lord, that we'll be faithful. For those who couldn't make it tonight, Lord, I ask that you'll bring them back here Wednesday and for next week. And I thank you again for this time, and I ask these things in your name. Amen.